I'll call the meeting to order. Why don't we do a roll call just to make sure everybody has their names that are out there for public consumption.
Connor Reed here.
Alicia Cabral here.
Caroline O'Neill here.
Jackie Wiseman here.
Mike Barger here.
And Tom Broussard.
Jeremy Tamelio.
And I think Wendy in Maryland, I'm not sure if you have to announce because you're in capacity as a support function. Am I wrong on that? Or are they?
Right, we don't vote.
Right, don't vote. So, but nice to have you. And Michael, good to see you as named by Town of Easton. Thank you everybody for announcing your name. Everybody should have in front of them the agenda for tonight. The agenda that we have in terms of items would be first up, discussion on the 2021 operating budget position, where we are to date, as well as the preliminary view of the 2022 operating budget. We do also have the discussion regarding the status of the annual town meeting 2021 draft warrant. We also have a time slot for updates from each of you for your representative boards and committees, should you so have some. We do also want to have a discussion topic regarding the joint budget meeting traditionally held with the Select Board and the Finance Committee. I think that's been a great benefit in the past. Approval of meeting minutes. This will bring back memories. February 18th, 2020. I was going away the following weekend. And March 4th, 2020 was when we all probably first started hearing about everything that has impacted us since then. Hard to believe a year has gone by. Just some housekeeping items we'll wrap up with. We have the setting of the next budget subcommittee meeting, the time. We do have a slot, as always, for public participation. It would be welcome. I do not know if we have any public participants that are listening in.
We do have Mike DiPietro.
So we do have a couple folks that are listening in. And lastly, there's a time slot here for the possible discussion and maybe vote for the election of a board of officers in terms of the chair and the vice chair. And we can discuss that when we get to it. So Mike, good to see you, sir. Welcome.
Managed to get my phone working since my laptop won't, so hence the funny angle.
Not at all. It's great to have you. Appreciate it. And I would say it's pretty par for the course in my pandemic Zoom meetings that 1 out of 11 would have a tech problem. It was me earlier today, so I can relate. So with that, Connor, if it's okay, I think it's appropriate to pass it over to you to start off our discussion on the first agenda item for the 2021 operating budget position to date and preliminary discussions on 2022.
Sure. So I didn't have a particular presentation on fiscal 21 to date outside of just wanting to have it on the agenda in the event the subcommittee or members on it from their own boards had any questions. Obviously, we had a pretty draconian budget adopted for this fiscal year, and thankfully CARES was extended into this calendar year, and some other funding sources such as ESSER for schools have been available as well, which have really been lifelines for us to be able to keep the lights on and fund so many of the types of expenses, both from a supply and materials standpoint, and probably speaking for the town, at least significant amounts of overtime for building maintenance, cleaning, and things like that. And just have that in case anyone had any questions about the status of where those things are. Been able to lean on FEMA reimbursements as well, which have been huge. And I wouldn't want to imagine the condition we and every other school and local government in the United States would be in absent those relief funds. But outside of a painful process last spring, I think those have been a real lifeline and have helped us get through.
Anybody have any questions or thoughts, considerations? the only question I have, Connor, and it's really just an overarching one, are there any really material deviations from the fact pattern that we had previously thought about 2021? Any material changes in revenue expectations or dramatic ramp up of expenses that might not be covered by CARES Act that we thought would? And I'm just using those as examples to illustrate material deviations from our previous assumptions.
So there have been, but most of them, at least that I think about, have been positive rather than negative. Obviously, when we balanced the budget in June of last year, we were anticipating some pretty severe cuts to state aid because that has been our historical experience during recessions, and the state level funded, which in a normal year we would be displeased with level funding, but obviously that was a benefit that allowed us to replenish the stabilization money we were using in the summer. As far as deviations, we also did not know that whether CARES would still be here today. When we were at town meeting in November, one of the things we had to think of and do to get, I guess, creative was put some money in the Finance Committee reserve account, a pretty significant amount, in the event that those federal COVID response funds were not extended past the end of that calendar year. They ended up being extended, and thankfully we, and Tom, and everyone here with a financial background knows, when there's a kind of deadline for eligibility for spending, and you don't know if it's going to be extended, it creates an incentive to spend the money. And thankfully the difference, hindsight seems like we made the right choice, but obviously if that didn't get extended, it would look like we made the wrong one. We did not spend that down, and then it was extended, so that was helpful. Other kind of material changes are, President Biden, one of the first acts he took in office was upping the FEMA reimbursement, the public assistance reimbursement for certain COVID disaster related costs from 75% of eligible expenses to 100, and made that retroactive to last March, which is pretty huge. We're still calculating the benefit of that, but what that will do is offset that 25 cents on the dollar. There's basically a staggered, and Wendy, correct me if I'm butchering any of this, but there's kind of a descending waterfall of funds that we have to go to in order, and I'm sure it's similar on the school side, where if something is CARES eligible, we would first have to attempt to recoup it through the FEMA Public Assistance Fund before the state, who administers the federal CARES funds, would allow us to write it off to CARES. So there's going to be a portion of money that was the town's 25% of FEMA eligible costs last year that we're now basically going to get back in the coffer of CARES to stretch that out a little bit farther, which is until December of 2021. So that's obviously hugely appreciated. One of the things that also, in addition to expanding from 75 to 100%, that the president's order did was it pretty broadly covered vaccination efforts. And so until the Commonwealth decided we couldn't run vaccine clinics anymore, we were able to seek reimbursement 100% of most costs associated with running vaccine clinics, which is great. That's, as we now know, not really going to be relevant to us, but it was very, very helpful while it lasted. It also, one other part of that order that's really important is that it makes COVID-related requests jump the line. As we've all joked before, I think we got NEMO reimbursements like last year, and I think NEMO happened in 2013. So it expedites COVID-related FEMA requests to the top of FEMA's priority list for reimbursement. So those are all those are good things from Washington. So I don't know if the schools have anything else on ESSER, those types of things, and feel free to jump in. But that's what sticks out to me as far as this year.
Sure. So we received ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. Both of them we've been using our CARES funding as well as our ESSER reimbursement for technology, both the devices and hotspots for students. We had to do an infrastructure increase because of the number of devices all at once that we hadn't, of course, anticipated, a good deal of software, and then all of our PPE expenses in terms of the nurse materials for nurses, robes, gloves, shields, thermometers for students. We don't take the temperature of every student, but we did have a good number of families who didn't have thermometers at home. We also have masks for every student and staff member, and 2 staffing lines. We had a lot of overtime for custodial costs, and also we have 3 sub nurses in the district all year because of the huge increase in the amount of traffic in the nurse's office, but also the fact that we were mandated to have an isolation room in every school. And as soon as the student goes to the isolation room, then you need 2 staff members in that building, 1 to man the office. So we've had 3 nurses in the district moving throughout the district during that time while school's in session. So all of those costs, again, as Connor said, we were so tight this year going into the school year that we never would have made it this far without that. And so almost everything I think that we've sent to the town so far has been eligible for FEMA reimbursement. So to know that that continues is going to be very important because especially if we start the next school year, normally we would incrementally add software. There are a lot of programs that the staff and students are using now that they want to continue using into next year. They want to take some positives from this situation, and they've been able to really increase their effectiveness by using a lot of online tools and resources. But also, we know that even though we fully anticipate to be back in school in September, we also anticipate that we're going to be needing to continue mask wearing and extra cleanings. And those things, if masks are mandated, then we are required to provide them for every person who comes into the building. So things like that, this is, the continued funding is going to be very helpful. Probably the custodial is going to continue as well. You may have heard at the state level a lot of conversation about the fact that schools in particular have not used all of the money that has been provided, and there are millions of dollars left over. But again, that's because it needs to last us for another year. And we don't buy all of our purchases up front. In fact, we've been limited for quite a while to only buying 2 months of PPE at a time. And in some cases, when there's a surge in ordering, you have to make sure that you really spread that out strategically. So again, with the mandate that we spread out our purchasing, with the staffing that you can't pay up front, you have to pay as they work, and the continued need for PPE going forward, it makes sense that the money hasn't been used because we're trying to use that money to help us get through next year as well. So it's not that it hasn't been needed. It's not that it isn't being used. It's just that some of the costs are weekly costs, and they're we're using consumables regularly, and so that is going to continue throughout next school year as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I appreciate you bringing it up because you are right that not just in the state but nationally, you hear some, in my view, clearly bad faith arguments being made that local governments or state governments or school districts don't need any federal support because they haven't spent every single dollar that they've been allocated. Part of the reason why we wouldn't do that is because we don't know if we're going to get any more. So it's kind of an interesting strategy to withhold additional funding and say, see, they haven't spent what we gave them at first. So that's a very good point that, there are kind of policy-based and then just reality and procurement and timing-based reasons why perhaps not every single dollar has been spent. But part of that is just kind of judiciously managing finite one-time money to get through a major crisis.
And there are, of course, I mean, things that I'm sure most people never even think about. Certainly I didn't know about it until now. Even when you're purchasing things like hand sanitizer, you can only have a certain amount because of the fire codes. You can only store a certain amount in buildings at a time. So you can't buy everything you need up front. You have to continue buying as time goes on. So that, you know, that's why the money hasn't been spent yet, because we need to continue even through this school year. We don't have enough resources to get us through this school year because we're not able to purchase it all at once.
And Dr. Burrell, I think you interweave something that's probably an item to be considered on a go-forward basis, but we may have, through this pandemic, structurally changed the operating expenses that we will go forward with in the future. And to the extent that we can, as we navigate future budgets, map those out, I think that's going to have to be a consideration for a potential fundamental cost structure change. I think I was speaking to your comment about the software, for example. That might be subscription. Yeah. You might have to have it on a go-forward basis, and that might just be part of an operating expense increase requirement.
Yeah, we're actually seeing that in our in the actual technology itself, because you know we purchased thousands of devices at once. We typically have a very parceled out procurement plan, because obviously you don't, it's like your appliances in your kitchen. You don't want to purchase everything at once because you don't want everything to expire at once. And so now we're seeing that going forward, where we have already altered our procurement plan going forward to make sure that we are taking into account the greater number of devices that we have. Not only are they a greater number of devices, but they're being used much differently. In the sense that instead of being part of a computer lab or even part of a cart that's in a classroom, they're now going home in backpacks, on buses, who knows what, at home or wherever else they may take it to do their work. So, you know, there's some of that we're able to anticipate, and we're parceling out, you know, 5 years into the future. There's some that we don't have a firm gauge yet on the wear and tear of the devices, because we've never had them used in this capacity, literally from kindergarten up. Right. So in order to not waste the investment that we have now with a one-to-one, certainly we didn't expect it to have it all in 1 year, but now that we have it, we really do, we have had to alter our technology plan going into the future so that we don't waste these incredible resources that our students now have.
And does that future technology plan, from a hardware perspective, does that fall under a capital budget or an operating budget?
Both. It falls under both. We do have some in operating, and we do have some in capital every year. Our capital went up over $100,000 this year for that very reason.
Right. Yeah. Team, any other questions, thoughts? I thought that was a great update. Thank you both very much for that. Connor, I think next up is the preliminary thoughts on the 2022 budget.
Sure. So about 3 weeks ago, I presented the preliminary budget to the select board. I'm going to review that again with Finance Committee tomorrow night. It was shared with everyone on this committee, the school committee, back in February, and hasn't been updated since. But we are thankfully not in as dark of a posture as we were a year ago. The preliminary deficit is manageable, so we're looking at a total projected expense budget next year right now of $93,653,000. Our current revenue estimates about $92,676,000. So there's a preliminary deficit of roughly $977,000, which is not nothing, but it is manageable and is comparable or slightly less than what we would regularly see pre-COVID. It's obviously worth noting that one of the main drivers of that is the fact that our expense budgets were so deeply cut in fiscal 21. So even the increases we're showing, there's a placeholder, of 3% for the schools. It's not a budget proposal, just a, kind of illustrative for now. the towns are right around that, I think 2.9 or 3%. We're increasing from a very flat or depressed level that's closer to fiscal 19, or sorry, fiscal 20 than 21. So that the reason the deficit's kind of in a manageable place is because so much was cut last year. But the silver lining is it is a more manageable place to start. Relatively standard on revenue side that, you know, taxation is 2.5% plus new growth. Our expectations on new growth are pretty cautious, just because there was a lot of disruption obviously last year. Some large projects are in permitting now, but that's going to take a while to get through that and have shovels in the ground and have units being sold and see those pick up on the growth ledger. State aid, we're looking at a slight increase from last year's level. So, you know, again, we would love to see much larger increases to state aid, but given what we've all been through, I think it's, you know, we will happily take a modest increase. The fact that we're a minimum aid community has not changed. The schools obviously get, what, $30 per student of an increase for a $42 million operation. That has never been sufficient. It continues to be insufficient, and it will forevermore be insufficient. I don't know if there's anything new to add there, but again, we're still.
The only thing, Connor, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The only thing I would add to that is there's also been a lot of press on the SOA, or the Student Opportunity Act, in the news recently. The commissioner's been talking about it quite a bit. As we have reported before, Easton does not benefit from the SOA. So when they do talk about the influx of several $1 million, Easton will not realize any of that money.
That's a good point. Thank you. So the structural dynamics that we had pre-COVID, and this I think was part of my budget message last year, is that COVID was just going to exacerbate the underlying structural deficiencies that we already have. And that's what we see. Taxation is now roughly 75% of our revenue. It used to be closer to 70. State aid is down to 15% of our revenue. It used to be nearly 25%. Reserve use, thankfully, is continuing to go down. Right now, what we're projecting for fiscal 22 is in accordance with the financial management guidelines. It's half of our free cash. Our free cash certifications have been declining as our margins narrow. Again, for anything that's no surprise to anyone on the subcommittee, we've been talking about these trends for many, many years, and like other areas of challenge, COVID exacerbated it. But so you're looking at, I think, 800,000 and change, which is quite a drop. In fiscal 16, we were using over 2 million in reserves. Obviously, given the fact that it's raining out and we've built a rainy day fund, that's something we're going to want to think about. You know, depending on how far out we are from balancing the budget and what the relative pain of cutting on top of cuts, you know, we can you know, revisit perhaps additional reserve use. That also will be impacted potentially by the fate of the most recent COVID stimulus bill that's being introduced on the House floor today, I think, and is in theory supposed to be voted on tomorrow. The American Rescue Plan that has state and school and municipal aid that would obviously be significant and helpful. That could have an impact on the operating budget, although we don't know exactly what just yet. So that's it on the revenue side. So, and then you have enterprise fund revenue increasing by roughly 1.7. So it's a total revenue increase of roughly $3 million, 3.32%. I think, Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, a good amount of that increase is being driven by exempt revenue associated with the building project. So that's obviously great, but that none of that's available for operating. So the $3 million increase is not actually $3 million for operational spending available. It's a much smaller number.
Yeah, that's debt went up $1.2 million in the budget.
So it's really about 1.8 million of non-spoken for increase at $93 million pie. So as usual, it is tight. You know, you look at taxation, an increase about 5.5%, which includes that exempt debt. And then our other revenue categories, local aid, we're being conservative on right now, 1.4% growth, and state aid, that's state aid. And for local receipts, we're being very conservative at 1%. That might change. That is one area in fiscal 21 that has done, a lot of areas have not done great, but building permits have actually done very, very, very well compared to our budget. But outside of that, it's looking pretty conservative for local receipts. So you have your second biggest revenue category only growing by 1.4. You have your third biggest revenue category growing by 1. That obviously puts a huge amount of strain on everything else. The expense side, as I indicated.
Before you, if you don't mind, I apologize.
Yeah, sorry.
I did want to point out, I thought it was something to be noted in the document you forwarded on the free cash certifications, that our free cash certifications have been coming down since 2017, which peaked just over 2.6 million, if I remember the exact number correctly. And it's normalized or come down to at about 1.6 million. And that's the last time we were that low was 2015, and the time before that was 2012. So to me, that's just being more accurate, so to speak, between the expenses and the revenues. But it also, to me, indicates a decreasing of the margin of error. Is that an okay way to phrase that?
Yeah, it's completely correct. Yeah, there is less margin for error, and don't forget those numbers are not relative. So back the last time it was 1.5 million, our operating budget was not 93, right? So as a percentage, this is even less of a window for error.
Great. So I think that's just important. I think there's a couple things. One, as I hear that the free cash certification is a great example of it, but I also, as we talked to people previously on our respective boards and still do about the challenges we face financially, when we are able to navigate these challenges in the way that we have, it's probably a good way to say it. I think that's really through an awful lot of hard work, a lot of effort, a lot of sacrifice in many cases, a tremendous amount of planning. And so, I just think that folks should appreciate that. I know our team does, but also residents in the community, that, thankfully we don't find ourselves in emergency situations as of yet, sign knock on wood, to immediately draw down our cash reserves. And I just want to say that it's just incredibly large amount of effort to ensure that you try to think of all the possible permutations of risk that might come, revenues that you plan for that might not exist. And certainly there's a lot of puts and takes. I just think you all deserve a tremendous amount of credit for navigating your budgets and expenses as you have. But to me, we're walking a fine line when free cash comes down, and to your point, percentage-wise, it comes down even more in all the challenges we know to come. So I just thought I'd point that out before you hit the expenses.
I appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions on any of those kind of early revenue assumptions outside of free cash? Okay, expenses are pretty rough estimate at this point. I will let Dr. Cabral weigh in if there's more to add than just basically saying schools are a placeholder for now. I think everyone here knows schools have been a little busy with some SNAP state decisions that have been made very recently. So on the town side, we're just under a 3%. I obsess over words in a way that's probably not productive and no one else cares. But that's why I felt the need to put a little footnote in my memo that at least I'll speak for the town, but I bet it's probably true for the schools. I wrote a 2.99% increase for 22 reflecting level service with limited exception. But I put a footnote, but it's worth noting when you say level service, you have to know the level where you're starting from. And even if we said level staff, we cut across town and school government roughly 30 full-time equivalents in the budget in fiscal 21. And so even if where we shake out is a balanced budget for 22, that's not as painful. If there's, a few restorations of positions, that's not kind of adding things, that would be like starting to very slowly crawl out of a hole. I am looking at certain areas if we have the wiggle room, because frankly, there's very real conversations happening now that I, in the interest of transparency, told the public a year ago, almost in May, that we were cutting so deep that even once COVID is under control, we're going to have departments and positions where they just really can't be available to people 5 days a week, which is not what we want. But there's only, the budget is the budget. So I just think it's super important, for us in our respective roles, and when we're talking in the community about, level staff or level, level budget. The level staff rolling from fiscal 22 is 30 fewer jobs than we had in fiscal 21, and we were not flush with, super deep rosters of extraneous positions in fiscal 21 either. So I just think that's worth noting. So we're looking at a roughly 3% on the town side. We're going to work on shaving that a bit. School numbers, a placeholder. I don't know, Dr. Cabral, you want to add anything to that, or?
Sure. We are still at 3% right now. It's difficult in the best of times to sort of determine where we're headed. We're certainly not adding a ton of resources, but we do have a lot of potential learning loss next year. And we don't know yet if we're going to be getting an ESSER 3, as Connor spoke about. Maybe we'll know sometime this week, but we also don't know how much it will. So the problem for us anyway is, while we have some capital expenses and we have certainly material expenses, the bulk of our budget is people and the services that we provide. And as Connor noted, we had to cut dozens of positions last year. And so most grants don't allow you to hire full-time staff with it. And certainly there's a reason. It's not fiscally responsible. At some point, the grant runs out. And if you have not folded that into your operational budget, you now have layoffs, you have unemployment costs because we're self-insured. And you're setting up a cliff for yourself. So we do have some positions we're looking at in terms of interventionists to not only assess where our students are at, but help them fill some real learning gaps that may have developed over the course of the school year and certainly over the summer. We're looking at a summer program for students. And again, it's very, very dependent on if we're able to get ESSER funds. So we will be watching that very closely, and that's going to be intimately tied to what our percentage for operational ends up being.
It's interesting to know how important it is to try to understand the shifting sands that are below us now, but also to try to also be tasked with writing what the next chapter looks like tomorrow when we haven't finished writing the one that we're in. And I just give you both credit. I give your teams and certainly all of those that execute and your staffs credit for trying to figure that out. It's very difficult to lead and help people appreciate that there will be a new chapter, that we will have a chance to write it, but so much of what we write is just beyond our control at this point in time. So thank you for being flexible, and thank you for, it's interesting, Connor brought up how you folks are dealing with the changes that come out daily. And we certainly get to hear on our side the daily challenges regarding getting the COVID vaccine, for example, for our second round. On the town side, it's, again, just credit to you folks for doing the best we can with the information at hand. It seemingly changes on a daily basis. So appreciate that update. Connor, thank you for the revenue update and the expense side. Team, is there any questions that you have for Connor or for Dr. Cabral?
Connor, I just have a quick question in regards to the potential stimulus money. Considering that's probably going to be one-time money with no guarantee that we're going to see it in fiscal 23. Do you have thoughts about how that might be spent? Should we get it? Would it be capital as opposed to, so there'd be one-time capital expenses?
It's a really good question. And so today on the municipal CEO call, Administration of Finance from the state indicated that for preliminary read they have. And so this bill is going back to the House today. That is the third time. So it was in the House, or it came from the White House, went to the House, went to the Senate. Now it has to go back to the House. And it has changed along the way, mostly on the margins. But the current read is that the funding would be available for use through 2024. So depending on what red tape or lack of red tape is put on that money, could have a huge impact on informing that kind of decision, right? If you're told you have to spend it by the end of the year, that's going to kind of tilt in favor of capital because you got to spend it. And as we all know, even if it was multiple millions of dollars, we have tens and nearly 100 million in capital work for a backlog in our capital plan. We could pick plenty of good projects from. But the preliminary read for now, and we'll see if the House changes it, is that the funds would be eligible through 2024. If that is the case, then you can kind of have kind of operating discussions with department heads and the community of, okay, well, it's one time, but depending on the magnitude of the funds, which again, we don't know that yet either, do you try to spread it out for a few years for certain programs with eyes open that absent a major revenue infusion on the tail end, those things may have to go away.
And
Frank?
just to add to that, on the school side, we also have a new elementary school coming online in that time period. So if the funding does extend to 2024, that gives us an opportunity to potentially leverage that for the positions that we so desperately need, knowing that we're going to realize some operational savings, but not how much operational savings yet. So it's a very tight line to walk, but it's something that we're definitely thinking through from many different angles, but until we get the details, it's really difficult to project because we're not sure what we're dealing with just yet.
Right.
That, Dr. Kroll, is one of the reasons I brought it up, because I think the public needs to know that money, potentially, even if it goes to 2024, it's still basically one-time money, unless we get a huge influx of new growth in this town or state aid goes through the roof.
Right.
It's dangerous to spend that money on operating costs.
Exactly.
So I just wanted
No,
to
you're
make sure the
exactly
public
right, and
knows
that's
that.
you're exactly right. That's really important for people to understand. A lot of times it's very difficult for people to understand why we may have some grant money that we're not using for positions, but that is precisely why, because they are, the moment you get a grant, it's dated, and there's an expiry on that, and you really have to think forward about whether those are costs that you can ultimately absorb into your operational budget. If not, you are creating you're not just losing those positions again, you actually create a financial hardship in the future.
The only thing I would add in terms of my own financial planning on my career, Craig, is that there is the introduction of one-time or short-time operating expenses that may be considered for coverage that are directly attributable in this particular case, and in my world, the purchase of PPE, for example. At some point it may not be as high as it is now, but there may be operating expenses that have a very defined lifetime that I would argue may be considered for some type of coverage. Doesn't detract at all from your point, though, Craig, that using one-time monies for long-term or continuous expenses is not a good practice. But there are some very unique pandemic-related expenses that one might hope would moderate over time next year.
Right. But all that said, that's a problem I'm happy to solve compared to the normal one of what are we cutting. Hopefully that, the right thing gets done in the next 24 hours and it is passed. And that'll make a huge, huge, huge difference. it depends on what kind of policy objectives. Because it's gone through the reconciliation process in the Senate, it's my understanding that there's not as much strings attached legislatively to the funds, but that leaves it up to the executive branch, the White House and the Treasury, to make decisions about how those funds are used. So depending on what policy outcomes the administration may want to see that money go towards, they could put some pretty specific goals. You know, we want to see infrastructure spending or something like that on the local level. So there's a lot to learn, but I think after this week things are going to move pretty quick, assuming it passes, and we're going to start learning stuff. And you know, I think it'll be an exciting thing if that happens. It's, you know, broadly popular among the American public, and you know, it will make a pretty large difference, not only thankfully for what we're all working on, but there's some major economic justice in there as well that would make huge differences for working class families, and you know, most folks making less than high six figures as far as stimulus and child tax credits and things like that. So, which would, in theory, you know, get the economy moving again, right? Because when we're talking about new growth, Easton was doing quite well, averaging in the upper 900s and over 1 million for a few years, for the first time in a very, very long time, right before COVID hit. And now, you know, we've cut our expectations by 30+%. So the sooner the broader economy gets back, and as anyone knows who's looked at Zillow, it's not as if there's an abundance of houses available to purchase. The better off I think things will be across the board. So
I think for context, Connor, the new growth that we're projecting in 2022 to start is just over 600,000. The last time we were at that level looks like FY 2014. So,
so what, before Stewart was built in Easton, basically, or right around that time. So we're hoping. You know, we're always happy to be wrong from being too conservative on a new growth estimate. So we'll see. I don't monopolize the budget conversation, Tom, but I've skipped over fixed costs. That's an area that we may get some daylight in. That's always super conservative at this point. So it's just worth note, you know, debt and interest is increasing. There's, you know, it seems like a lot, 35%, but a lot of that is obviously exempt and approved by the voters for the school building that was awarded the contract actually last night, which is very exciting. I think some 8-figure number under budget so far, so that's pretty great. I think it's 8 figures, whatever 10 million is.
It's perfectly on time as of now, and $10 million under budget as of now.
Which is great, especially considering it was done through COVID.
Fantastic.
So credit to the team on that. Health insurance, obviously a huge kind of budget driver. We plugged in, GIC gave preliminary market estimates of 5 to 7% earlier this winter, so we went with a worst case of 7. Wendy, I think we saw some preliminary rates come through. Have they done plan by plan rates yet?
They haven't done plan by plan rates. They have done plan by plan increases.
Okay.
They will be publishing the rates very soon.
So once we get those per plan rates, we're with GIC. I think there's 13 different plans. So we have to run the numbers on, you know, we have X number of employees in plan 1 through 13 times the new rates. We'll get an actual pretty quick. That should be in the coming weeks. Hopefully that'll come down marginally. Get some savings there. Pension assessment is baked in. You know, no one loves seeing a 5% increase to a fixed cost, but that's actually relief compared to prior years. We were seeing 8% a year. They've punted out their full funding date a little bit. We're still carrying a $200,000 snow and ice deficit. We're at, I think, like 95% spend on that budget right now. So hopefully, you know, it stays sunny and that'll make a difference. And then county and state assessments, I think a relatively normal increase there. Regional school assessments, 8%. That's pretty meaningful. Bristol Aggie has a MSBA project. Theirs is funded very differently. They just vote on it, I think, as basically a policy, and it just gets put on our bill. And then Contract settlements, we have a very small set aside and a collective bargaining reserve. I think all school unions have already taken a 1-year extension at 1%. So thank you to those labor groups for that. Add some stability and planning, and all but 2 of the town unions have done the same so far. And that gives us a little bit more flexibility for planning. So that's good. So, so that's a very quick overview of fixed costs. I'm happy to touch on any of that, or if folks want to move on, I'm happy to get out of your way on it as well.
Any questions on fixed costs?
I got a question, but honestly, we're going back a little bit, but it's on the budget. So obviously the general trend in a downward trend in free cash, let's call it.
Great.
Would it be fair to expect that to increase at least for the next couple fiscal years or next fiscal year, just because we're doing such conservative estimates on different parts of the budget that are now being exceeded?
It depends. Wendy, I don't know if you have, I think it's probably too soon for you to have any read on fiscal 21. I mean, fiscal 21 free cash may be an outlier because there are these federal funds we can tap into that otherwise offset funds we would have to hit the operating account for. But that's going to be on a really kind of department by department basis, and it will also depend on the timing of those reimbursements. But Wendy, do you expect any variation or change in that, or you expect that to kind of continue at either level or declining certifications?
It is tough to say, but I do think that it probably will tend to still keep declining. You know, you might have some years where it's flat, maybe it goes up a little bit, but nothing significant. I really do think that we're on a downward trend because as a whole, our expenses just, outpace the revenue growth.
Right.
And this year, I mean, it's good that we were conservative with our estimates too for local receipts, because I do think that, motor vehicle excise tax, that's going to be down. That first commitment, it's come out and it was down from last year. It's hard to say where motor vehicle is going to be though, because there's so many billing cycles that occur during the year, and they don't start until January. So we're like maybe 47% collected, on motor vehicle, and we're more than halfway through the year. The other thing too is ambulance revenue doesn't look horrible, but it doesn't look great either. So that's something to keep in mind. Building permits and some of those other fees are good, and they tend to be trending on track, but you're going to have these offsets. So, but I do think that we will have savings on the expenditure side this year, because there really still isn't, people still aren't, going and doing a lot of things, and everything's more remote, and that does save money. So.
Well, that's also an artificial savings that eventually, in theory, if we resumed something close to normal, there's going to be spending that picks back up, right? So you run the risk of, there are some budget philosophies that look at, any turnbacks and expense accounts at the end of the year and say, well, obviously you didn't need it. And so, again, that can create a negative incentive for budget managers to spend if they don't need to. And especially in kind of freak years like this, that's not necessarily applicable. So I'm sure that was as clear as mud. Apologize.
It got at all the points. It got there eventually. Thank you.
Any other questions on the 2022 prelim thoughts? The only thing I do want to bring up as we're talking about the budget is just, this goes back to where we were almost a full year ago. As we talk about the room and latitude within our budget, both in terms of the impact of revenues, what's available to us, and the expenses, that I agree with your footnote, Connor, and how judicious all sides of the expense structure are for our team. I do want to bring up, last year we were talking about where our community stood in comparison on a per capita basis to other communities. And so I want to make sure people appreciate that your I don't want to call it thriftiness, but your sensitivity to ensuring we control our expenses, probably a good way to say it, on all fronts for all the teams on this call, extends as you look at us compared to our communities that are close to us, our peer communities. And I'll just bring up some stats. In 2014, our expenditure per capita was 9% less. In 2017, it was 13% less, and in 2018, it was 20% less. And that basically, that 20% decrease, that was material across all the major departments from education, general government, police, fire, DPW, and certainly even our reserves when you looked at that. So, we are a town that has traditionally run lean. We often say things like we do more with less. And I just am continuously impressed with exactly how much you do, all of you, and with less resources, so to speak. So just again, credit to you all. I think at some point it would be important for us as a community to engage and re-engage on that discussion that we were having at this point last year. I think to a certain degree we may be in doing better than survival mode, but we're certainly dealing with the pandemic, and you are all doing so admirably. But I do think that there are foundational challenges that we face, both from a structural revenue perspective, and the amount of expenses that we have available for us to support the services and, on the town and the school side. And I think that's something to consider at the appropriate point in time in place in the future. So I just bring that up. A lot of great work was done last year to highlight that. Any thoughts or questions before we move on to general discussion regarding the annual town warrant? Hearing none, I shall move us along to the second bullet point. I think we'll be able to make some faster pace here as we look at the clock. Thank you all for your patience. Connor, do you want to bring us up to date on where we're at in the annual town meeting process, the warrant process?
Sure. The first draft of the annual town meeting warrant was published Monday night, yesterday.
Okay.
Was published yesterday. The third Monday in May is May 17th this year. We have the location listed as to be determined because obviously, although signs are promising as far as vaccines, starting to pick up, we're very likely still going to be contending with social distancing and other challenges that make picking a room difficult. We've already reached out to Stonehill to see if that's an option. We'll figure that location out. But the warrant is available online. Everyone on this subcommittee should have received it either through your kind of parent committees or other venues. It's not a super long warrant. I think you're talking not even 20 articles, which for an annual town meeting is pretty small. I went back and read a few years worth of warrants to make sure I wasn't missing something, and it seems complete. You have your typical articles there, the operating budget, capital budget, some CPA articles, a couple tweaks of general bylaws, and then the typical slate of zoning that the planning board is finalizing and will be bringing forward. I'm happy to answer any questions. The select board took votes on a handful of them last night. Finance committee will do a probably similar round of them tomorrow night, and we'll work through the process as we do every year, updating it every other Monday when the select board meet to reflect the progress of revisions to those articles and recommendations or not on them by select board and finance committee.
Excellent update, sir. Any questions, thoughts, concerns? Hearing none. Fantastic. We did leave a period of time for an update for folks to talk about their respective boards or other committees that they may be on as it pertains to the budget subcommittee. So I will leave it as an open mic, but does anybody want to speak about their respective boards and committees? Great, everything's going well on your other boards and committees. I encourage you to keep that up. I do think we got a fantastic update from both Connor and Dr. Cabral, so I'm sure that helps inform our other committees. Jeremy, I know you and Mike will be having your finance committee meeting tomorrow about the budget, so I'm sure you'll have some great discussion and informed insights. So we will move on from that. Discussion regarding the joint budget meeting with the select board and the finance committee.
Sure. So the charter stipulates we'll have at least one joint meeting or hearing with the select board and finance committee that we also traditionally have the school committee come to as well. I think at least a month before town meeting. We usually are a bit ahead of that schedule. We typically have it Monday, the last select board meeting in March, and the corresponding Wednesday to spread the departments out. We're going to push that a little bit this year to the first meeting in April and the corresponding Wednesday, just to give departments a little bit more time. Again, I shouldn't make light of it. Obviously, the school situation and Commissioner Riley's decision has put a huge amount of pressure on every school in the state. So telling everyone, hey, have a budget presentation in the next 2 weeks seemed unnecessary, frankly. So we're looking at April 5th and 7th. 5th is a regular meeting night of the select board. The 7th would not be a regular meeting night of finance committee, but we've been in touch with the chair and vice chair. They've indicated that's doable. We technically did this last year. I think May 18th, we had the three boards together for the kind of first COVID budget revision. That was not fun, and I hope to never do it again. And I'm sure you all agree. And so we'll make it a nicer time this time, and be a little bit more back to normal, although still probably on Zoom. We'll have each department come in, just give an overview of what they're looking at next year, answer questions, and move forward.
Connor, last year our team presented or was planning to present our findings or thoughts regarding the state of the financials for our town. I just want to pose to the team, and I'm not one to step back for all of us, but I would posit that we have an awful lot going on, we being you all, in terms of actually running your respective disciplines. If it's okay with the budget subcommittee as a whole, I would recommend that we not seek to reserve our own time slot to have our own presentation, unless you all felt it was appropriate and wanted to do so. Then I would be happy to support if that's what the team decided. Jeremy, in an unofficial vote, has shaken his head in a negatory fashion, but that is not an official vote, but that was one.
Caroline had her hand up.
Caroline, hi. Oh, you're on mute, Caroline.
Okay, yep. Actually, this was about the two dates that you mentioned for the joint meeting. I just wanted to point out that April 5th is the day that actually we're mandated to go back full in person for all the elementary school children. So that's going to be a pretty busy, possibly fraught day
Right.
for the department. So if we are going to do any kind of presentation, I would suggest that we are put on the 7th rather than the 5th.
Yes.
And I think, and Tom, I think your idea is a good one. I'm not sure that people have the bandwidth right now for additional presentations from additional committees. So I think that's a good idea.
So that is an unofficial move by Jeremy and a second by Caroline. Anybody against, or are we okay with that? All right, we covered that. Next up is the approval of meeting minutes from February 18th of 2020 and March 4th of 2020. Does anybody?
Tom, I'm sorry. We actually failed to send the minutes for February to the subcommittee because, truth be told, I can't remember who did them. It was a meeting Mike could not be at, and I vaguely recall looking at someone across the room, and it might have been, I don't want to say it's someone else's job. It might have been me. I just can't remember. So does anyone here remember, first of all, February 2020 at all? And if you do, did you take the minutes draft that night? If not, Mike and I can go back and grab the video feed and pull it together. Does anyone remember doing them?
I can't remember a month ago, let alone a year ago, so I think it's probably.
That was the before
We did
time,
remember
a long,
and
long ago.
actually found them. That would be impressive.
Yes. All right. Well, we'll piece those back together for the next meeting. So my mistake on that.
Not at all. I think you're going to really enjoy that February 18th meeting when you watch it on video.
Yeah.
I don't know why both you and Michael said after supper. I think there's a very simple coin flip decision that could be made one way or another.
Probably.
All right, so we do have March 4th, 2020. Anybody have any issues with those minutes?
Motion to approve.
O'Neill, second.
Excellent. So that's Reed and O'Neill. I guess we have to say our names and then yes, following the select board methodology. So I'll let you all start.
DePietro,
Marjorie.
yes.
Marjorie, yes.
Cabral, yes.
O'Neill, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Camelio abstain.
Connor and Dr. Cabral, your voting members.
I'm sorry, Reed. Yes.
I'm sorry, I said Cabral, yes. I may have been,
Excellent.
my apologies.
No worries. You were probably drowned out. So that was 1, 2, 3. Broussard, yes, just in case. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yeses, 1 abstention. If I did the math right. Nice to actually get you to affirm Connor. Usually it goes the other way in our meetings. Setting of the next budget subcommittee meeting. Any thoughts, time frame? So if April 5th is when we'll be meeting, what I wouldn't want to do is to force a meeting in, given everybody's workloads and schedules. Is there any reason that we would have a material change in the fact pattern that the budget subcommittee would like to engage upon prior to joining the April 5th call, Connor, or Dr. Cabral? Is there any big findings we'll get between now and then that couldn't be articulated via email or anything?
No, well, not from my office. So I'm currently planning on issuing my first budget revision for that Monday, April 5th. So we, hopefully we have a lot more information by then. There's only one select board meeting before that, and that's the 22nd. So I don't plan on another cut of the budget for the 22nd. So I don't, unless the schools have something I'm not thinking of. I think that from a
No,
budget.
we're in the same position.
Great. So I wouldn't advocate for a meeting before. Do we want to set up a meeting in April that is after these 2 meetings, but obviously before a town meeting on April 24th to have any review? Or would you like to leave that as pending TBD based upon the outcome of April 5th and April 7th? And if there is a material fact pattern that we feel like we need to engage, I will send it around an email to gauge interest.
I think we should schedule something, Mr. Chairman, just to have it on the books.
And then that way, if we have to, we could cancel it.
Yes.
I'm sure. We could 5th and 7th. We'll have those budget hearings, finance committees at both. They have a meeting the 14th. When is school vacation? Because I feel like that's usually a bad week, right?
You're muted, Dr. Cabral.
Sorry, the week of the 19th.
So would the week of the 12th be better for schools, or would vacation week be better?
Vacation week's fine.
So would we like to do the Tuesday the 20th? Do Tuesdays work for this team?
You can sing me happy birthday.
That's
On the 20th.
exactly what we were hoping you would say, Mike. We're in.
You'd have to show up first, Mike.
I can even try and be on time.
So
As long as we're
Tuesday-
still remote, that week is fine.
Great. Tuesday, the 20th, we will plan on it being remote, and we will schedule it for 6 p.m., same time.
Sure. And we'll be in touch with whoever the chair is in April, and we'll see, depending on how the budget hearings go, if we need to keep it or rescind it. So Mike can send a holdout for everyone for your calendars.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Or Town of Easton, as you're nicknamed. Next up is public participation. I do see two people, Joe Borman and Kim Pincus. If either of them have any questions or thoughts, if Mike, I think I should probably ask them how this goes. Do they put it in the chat column? Or?
Joe and Kim are both
Cable.
ECAT.
They're
That
both
doesn't
of
mean
them
they
are,
can't participate.
That is true.
Kim and Joe are both ECAT.
Excellent. Thanks, Carolyn.
But
I guess they have no
Tom,
questions tonight.
I did have a little comment earlier that I
Please.
was trying to wave my hand. I just wanted to compliment Michael on a really outstanding set of minutes. Well, the one set that we were able to approve. Really nicely done, Michael.
So, Mike DePietro, don't let that go to your head. That was not for you. Just want you to know.
Sounds like Caroline would like you to do February as well.
Doesn't it?
Tom's
He
roasting.
should be punished for doing a good job.
I think we actually know. I mean, that's typically the way it works, right? If you show like whoever volunteers to fix the copier once and they do a good job, it's forevermore your job.
Good work finds good people. So we've taken care of public participation. We do have possible discussion and vote, election of board officers, chair and vice chair for us. So just serving notice from my perspective, I think as you all know, I am not running for re-election. I am currently your chair here. Jackie, I believe you are the vice chair.
Yes, but I am running for re-election, so,
You got
you
it.
never know what's gonna happen.
You never know. Well,
We have a lot of confidence, Jackie.
Absolutely. I would wish you luck, but I'm confident luck is not needed in this case. I don't mind shepherding you through the next meeting and setting up an agenda. Jackie, I'm happy to work with you to set that. So we will have a next meeting, so I won't say goodbye just yet. So with that said, I didn't know, obviously as my announcement, I just wanted to offer the team if they wanted to elect anybody in, now, or if the vice chair wanted to have their thoughts for what the next meeting was with anticipation of going forward. But Jackie, you bring up a good valid point. So unless anybody feels an overwhelming need to change our current org structure, we can keep it going for one more time until elections are finished, and then you all can regroup and determine what the next look at leadership looks like for the budget subcommittee.
That makes a lot of sense, Mr. Chairman.
Great. I have nothing else. Any notes from budget subcommittee members that they want to talk about? Connor, I love the raise the hand feature.
I do. I just want to say I have a risk that we end up not having the meeting next month in the event that things are unusually stable in April. Just to say thank you to you for your service as chair. And I know it's probably difficult for you that we were working on what the budget subcommittee probably always wanted to be doing, which was looking at the kind of structural problems we all know that we have and need to deal with. And then the world turned upside down. I think that was one of all of our last public meetings in person, I think. And it seems like 3 lifetimes ago. So I appreciate the focus on that. And, I don't want to apologize that it's no one's fault COVID happened, but that work won't go to waste. And once things stabilize again, we'll pick that back up. So thank you for your work on that. I'm sure everyone here agrees.
Thank you, Connor. I appreciate it. Just at the risk of not having a future meeting, I can tell you all that I deeply respect you all as professionals. You're an incredibly talented team, and I am humbled to have been a small part of it along the way. I reflect back as a member of the Finance Committee, joining that and learning how the town really works and the incredible efforts that so many of you put into it, and certainly the volunteerism of those people that are elected or run and join and support this town. And I can tell you that I have learned a lot more from all of you than I'm sure I've been able to impart to you folks. So I'm incredibly appreciative of that and thankful. So I'm sure I'll see you and our paths will cross. And until then, I know you all will enjoy tremendous amount of successes. And I look forward to reading, hearing, and seeing them. That's for sure. So thank you all so much. I appreciate that comment.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, folks. Oh, Caroline?
Just want to say that I do hope that you will be willing to act as a consultant, because you certainly have, significant expertise that really most of the rest of us do not. So, I think we could probably manage $1 a month or so as a consulting fee, and then no, really, it would be great if I'm hoping you'll stay
Hey,
involved.
that's more than we get.
It's true. That's true. Good point.
See that, Caroline? When you give to one, the budget goes up for all. But I'm not going anywhere. Jenny and I and the kids live in Easton. We just moved to our forever home, God willing, and we couldn't be happier. We're proud of the community we live in and the people that are in it. And I'm sure I won't go away, Caroline. I'm always going to be available to help and assist. So I appreciate
That's a commitment. This is being recorded.
Well said. Thank you all. I appreciate that. And on that note, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Roger.
All right. First by Barger, second by DePietro, and roll call vote.
Barger, yes.
Yes.
O'Neill, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Cabral, yes.
Reed, yes.
Camelio, yes.
And Broussard, yes. Thank you all. Have an awesome night. Stay safe, and thanks for everything that you do for us.
Thank
You
you.
as
Have a
well,
good week.
everyone.
Thanks all. Take care.
Stay safe, everybody.
Night.
Bye, everybody.